The relationship between Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love was as chaotic and unforgettable as the music they created, a love story that embodied the raw, unfiltered essence of the grunge era. It was a union that fascinated and divided the world, two creative forces, both brilliant and deeply troubled, whose connection burned with an intensity that could not be ignored. Kurt, the quiet and introspective frontman of Nirvana, became the voice of a generation with his haunting lyrics and enigmatic presence. Courtney, the unapologetically bold and rebellious leader of Hole, shattered stereotypes with her provocative artistry and fierce personality. Together, they seemed like an unlikely pairing, yet their bond was undeniable. Their relationship unfolded against the backdrop of fame, addiction, and relentless public scrutiny, becoming one of the most controversial and polarizing romances in rock history. From their whirlwind courtship to the birth of their daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, Kurt and Courtney's lives intertwined in a way that was both electric and volatile. Their struggles with addiction and the weight of their fame played out in full view of an unforgiving media landscape, turning their private lives into public spectacle. Their love story often drew comparisons to another infamous rock romance, Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen, the doomed punk couple whose toxic relationship became a cautionary tale of self-destruction. Like Sid and Nancy, Kurt and Courtney were bound by an intoxicating mix of love, chaos, and addiction, existing in a world where passion blurred into pain and self-destruction seemed inevitable. But unlike Sid, whose life unraveled entirely after Nancy's death, Courtney was left behind to carry the weight of Kurt's loss, forced to navigate a world that painted her as both victim and villain. Kurt's tragic death in 1994 not only shattered Courtney, but left the world grappling with unanswered questions. Was their love a transcendent connection between two tortured artists, or was it a destructive force that fueled the darkness they both struggled to escape? In this video, we delve deep into the turbulent relationship of Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, exploring the passion that ignited their union, the struggles that defined their lives, and the lasting legacy of a love story that remains as enigmatic and haunting as the couple themselves. Kurt Cobain, born in 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington, grew up in a small, working-class town. His childhood was marked by instability. His parents' divorce when he was 9 had a profound impact on him, instilling a deep sense of isolation and anger that would later define his music. As a teenager, Kurt found solace in art, punk rock, and the burgeoning Seattle music scene. By the late 1980s, he had formed Nirvana, a band that would redefine rock music with its gritty, emotionally raw sound. Kurt's introspective and poetic lyrics reflected his struggles with identity, pain, and the search for meaning, making him the reluctant voice of a generation by the time Nirvana exploded into mainstream success with Nevermind in 1991. Courtney Love, on the other hand, was born in 1964 in San Francisco, California, into a family with artistic and countercultural leanings. Her childhood was equally turbulent, marked by rebellion and a sense of displacement. Courtney's formative years were spent bouncing between foster homes and boarding schools, and she was expelled multiple times for her defiant behavior. Determined to make her mark, she immersed herself in the punk rock scene in cities like Portland, Los Angeles, and even overseas in Liverpool. In the mid-1980s, before forming Hole, Courtney briefly played in the experimental rock band Faith No More as a vocalist. However, her tenure with the group was short-lived. She was ultimately dismissed, with the band later admitting they didn't believe she was the right fit for their evolving sound. Undeterred, she continued pursuing music, refining her identity as an artist and immersing herself deeper in the underground scene. By 1989, she formed Hole, a band that emerged as a fierce and unapologetically feminist force in the grunge movement, with Courtney's raw, confessional lyrics and incendiary stage presence. The release of their debut album, Pretty on the Inside, set her apart as a trailblazer, establishing her as one of the most provocative voices in alternative rock, challenging conventions both musically and culturally. Both Kurt and Courtney carried with them a profound sense of pain, alienation, and a desire to express their truths through music. It was perhaps inevitable that their paths would cross, two kindred spirits destined to collide. Kurt and Courtney first met in 1990 at the Satyricon nightclub in Portland, Oregon. Courtney, already a fan of Nirvana, made the first move. In a room full of chaos, Kurt stood out to her, not just as a musician, but as someone whose quiet demeanor intrigued her. By most accounts, the initial interaction was playful and flirtatious, with Courtney reportedly wrestling Kurt to the ground in an unorthodox display of interest. It was a moment that hinted at the intensity and unpredictability that would come to define their relationship. Though sparks flew during this first meeting, their connection didn't immediately blossom into romance. Both were entangled in their own lives and careers, yet they couldn't forget each other. Over the next 2 years, their paths continued to cross as both Nirvana and Hole gained prominence. Courtney was persistent in her interest, while Kurt, cautious and reserved, took time to open up. Despite this initial spark, Cobain was hesitant to pursue a relationship right away. He later reflected on his feelings, stating, "I was determined to be a bachelor for a few months, but I knew I liked Courtney so much right away that it was a really hard struggle to stay away from her for so many months." By late 1991, shortly after the release of Nirvana's Nevermind, the two began a relationship that would quickly grow intense. Kurt was initially drawn to Courtney's sharp wit, charisma, and her ability to see through the superficialities of fame. Courtney, in turn, admired Kurt's vulnerability and his deeply creative mind. Both outsiders in their own ways, they found a kinship in one another, a bond forged not just through mutual attraction, but through a shared understanding of the burdens they carried. On February 24, 1992, Kurt and Courtney married on a beach in Waikiki, Hawaii, in a ceremony that was as unconventional as their relationship. Kurt wore green plaid pajamas, a stark contrast to the traditional image of a groom, while Courtney wore a satin and lace dress once owned by actress Frances Farmer, an icon of rebellion and tragedy, a fitting symbol for their union. The wedding was intimate and low-key, attended by a few close friends, far removed from the chaos of their public lives.
In other news from the Northwest music scene, Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain married his girlfriend, singer Courtney Love of the Los Angeles band Hole, in Hawaii recently. The couple appears on the cover of next month's Sassy magazine, talking about their new Victorian home. And at that Olympia rally, bassist Chris Novoselic shared the news of their marriage with us and talked about finally coming off a 7-month world tour.
We saw the world, we met people all over, experienced different cultures, cuisines. How's Kurt? He's great, and Dave, those guys are fine. Kurt's in Los Angeles. He's a newlywed, and Dave's with his family in Virginia.
At the time of their marriage, Courtney was already pregnant with their daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, who would be born later that year. The marriage marked a pivotal moment in their lives, symbolizing both their love and the challenges that lay ahead. While Kurt and Courtney adored each other deeply, their relationship was anything but stable. Their struggles with addiction began to spiral, and the pressures of fame and media scrutiny only exacerbated the cracks in their relationship. After their marriage, Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's relationship became a lightning rod for controversy, fueled by their increasing drug use, unfiltered personalities, and the relentless scrutiny of the media. While the world was still captivated by Nirvana's meteoric rise to fame, Kurt and Courtney's public image began to unravel, marked by a series of events that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Kurt Cobain's relationship with drugs began long before he met Courtney. Struggling with chronic pain from an undiagnosed stomach condition, Kurt initially turned to heroin as a form of self-medication in the late 1980s. He found temporary relief in the drug, which not only numbed his physical pain, but also dulled the emotional turmoil he had carried since childhood. However, as Nirvana's success skyrocketed following the release of Nevermind in 1991, Kurt's heroin use escalated. The pressures of fame, endless touring, and his intense introversion created a perfect storm, and heroin became a way to cope with the demands of his newfound celebrity. Courtney Love, who had her own history of drug use, became an enabler as their relationship deepened. Together, they spiraled into a cycle of addiction, often using drugs as a means of escape from the chaos that surrounded them. While their love was undeniable, Their shared struggles with addiction became one of the most destructive forces in their lives. In September 1992, Vanity Fair published an article titled "Strange Love," written by Lynn Hirschberg. The article painted a damning portrait of Courtney and Kurt, focusing heavily on their drug use and personal lives. The most incendiary claim in the piece alleged that Courtney had used heroin during her pregnancy with Frances Bean Cobain, their daughter who was born in August 1992. This accusation sparked widespread outrage and led to real-life consequences that devastated the couple. Hirschberg, alleging that Courtney had admitted to using heroin during her pregnancy, quoted her as saying, "We went on a binge," she says, referring to a period when Nirvana was in New York to appear on Saturday Night Live. Further stating, "We did a lot of drugs. We got pills, and then we went down to Alphabet City, and Kurt and I wore hats, and we copped some dope. Then we got high and went to SNL. After that, I did heroin for a couple of months." Courtney later insisted her words were taken out of context, claiming she had been misrepresented, but the damage was already done. Shortly after the article's publication, Child Protective Services intervened, temporarily removing Frances Bean from their custody. For Kurt and Courtney, this was a devastating blow, one that amplified their feelings of paranoia, anger, and despair. While Courtney publicly denied the claims, the media frenzy surrounding the story further tarnished their already controversial reputation. Kurt, who already struggled with feelings of inadequacy and distrust of the press, was deeply affected by the fallout. The aftermath of the Vanity Fair article exacerbated Kurt's already fragile mental state. He became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn, convinced that the media was out to destroy him and his family. In his anger, he left a series of threatening voicemails for Victoria Clark, a journalist who had been close to Nirvana but was suspected of leaking information about their personal lives. These voicemails were filled with anguish and rage, revealing the depth of Kurt's emotional unraveling.
Victoria and Brett, this is Kurt Cobain. I'd appreciate it if you called me at 883-1980. I have a lot of things to say to you. A lot of fucking things to say to you. You parasitic little fucking cunts. I don't care if this is a recorded threat. I'm at the end of my ropes. You'll understand when you see me in person. Never been more fucking serious in my life.
Determined to take control of their own narrative, Kurt and Courtney sat down for an interview with Spin magazine in December 1992, addressing the controversy head-on. The interview centered on their parenting skills, and the media's portrayal of them as reckless and unfit parents was an attempt to fight back against the negative press. They painted themselves as misunderstood, pushing back against the idea that they were incapable of raising Frances. Accompanying the article was the now iconic Family Values photo shoot, staged in their Los Angeles home. In one of the most infamous images, Courtney posed with the words "Family Values" scrawled in black marker across her exposed stomach, a pointed jab at the conservative backlash they had received. The photo shoot was provocative, messy, and defiant. It was their way of reclaiming the narrative, embracing the chaos that surrounded them, while mocking the moral outrage directed at their family. By mid-1993, Kurt Cobain's heroin addiction had escalated to dangerous levels, fueled by a combination of chronic pain, depression, and the suffocating pressures of fame. Despite the critical and commercial success of In Utero, which was set to be released in September, Kurt was struggling to maintain any sense of stability. The demands of touring, fatherhood, and constant media scrutiny only worsened his condition. On the night before Nirvana's scheduled performance at the Roseland Ballroom in New York City in July 1993, Kurt suffered a heroin overdose in his hotel room. This was not the first time he had overdosed, but this particular incident was severe enough that those around him feared for his life. Courtney Love, who was with him at the time, reportedly had to physically revive him. Some accounts suggest she administered naloxone, an opioid antidote, while others claim she resorted to slapping him and dousing him with cold water to wake him up. The severity of the overdose underscored just how deep Kurt had sunk into addiction. Despite the life-threatening event, Kurt refused to seek medical attention or cancel the performance. The next night, he took the stage at the Roseland Ballroom, clad in what would become an iconic black and red striped sweater, looking visibly frail yet determined. The performance itself was both haunting and electric. Kurt delivered an emotionally raw set, his voice filled with pain and intensity, as if exercising his inner demons through the music. Those in attendance saw a man seemingly pouring every last bit of himself into the performance, yet behind the scenes, he was hanging by a thread. His bandmates and crew were growing increasingly concerned about his well-being, as it was becoming evident that he was losing control. Courtney, known for her fiery and unapologetic nature, was equally enamored with their daughter, but she, too, was battling her own demons. Her drug use had been scrutinized by the media even before Frances was born, and the infamous Vanity Fair article only intensified the storm. She was determined to prove to the world that she could be both a rock star and a mother, but her addiction complicated everything. The couple's fights became more frequent, fueled by drugs, frustration, and the overwhelming feeling that they were being backed into a corner. While Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love shared an undeniable bond, their addictions pulled them in opposing directions, creating a fracture that deepened as time went on. For Kurt, heroin was a sedative, a way to dull the pain, both physical and emotional, that had haunted him since childhood. It was an escape from the pressures of fame, fatherhood, and his own self-loathing. For Courtney, however, drugs were often fuel, a way to amplify her already explosive energy, to stay sharp, and to fight back against a world that never seemed to accept her. Their conflicting ways of coping led to a painful imbalance in their relationship. Kurt sought solitude and silence. Courtney demanded control and confrontation. Their once passionate love became an exhausting cycle of codependency, fights, reconciliations, and more drug use. At times, Courtney attempted to help Kurt quit heroin. She reportedly threw away his stash on multiple occasions, but addiction had its grip on both of them. Their relationship became a volatile mix of love and destruction, where moments of tenderness were overshadowed by chaos. As their daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, grew, so did Kurt's guilt. The fear of failing as a father tormented him. He often wondered if Frances would one day look at him with disappointment, just as he had resented his own parents for their failings. This fear only deepened his depression, making it harder for him to believe he was worthy of love, not from Frances, not from Courtney, not from anyone. The weight of fatherhood, addiction, and his own mental struggles left him increasingly detached, unable to find peace even in the presence of those he loved most. The cracks in their relationship became more visible on June 4, 1993, when Kurt was arrested for alleged domestic assault following an argument with Courtney at their home in North Seattle. The fight had begun over the presence of guns in their house, an issue that had become a recurring source of tension between them. The situation unfolded chaotically. The couple had been playing loud music in their garage, attracting the attention of neighbors, who eventually called the police. By the time officers arrived, the argument had escalated. According to police reports, Courtney admitted to throwing a glass of juice in Kurt's face. In response, Kurt allegedly pushed her, and she pushed him back. The altercation turned physical, with Kurt reportedly pushing her to the floor and choking her. When police arrived, they found Courtney with minor injuries, including a scratch on her forearm and neck. Despite this, Courtney vehemently denied that Kurt had assaulted her. She insisted that they had simply been wrestling and that she had scratched her arm on a guitar string. When this was brought up during an interview shortly after, Courtney later stated, "Kurt is not violent. He is not a wife beater. We are the most compatible people on earth." Love cracked, also stating, "It's not a true story. Why is it every time we have a beer, it's on the news?" When asked about the confiscated guns, Courtney joked, stating, "I hate that gun. It reminds me of Axl Rose." Despite her defense, Kurt was arrested for investigation of domestic assault, a misdemeanor charge that left him spending 3 hours in jail. a period Courtney later described as hell. He was released on a $950 bail, but the incident cast an even darker shadow over their already troubled relationship. While Kurt and Courtney's relationship was often chaotic, it was undeniably passionate. Their love had an obsessive quality, one that many believe found its way into Kurt's songwriting, most notably in Heart-Shaped Box. Originally titled Heart-Shaped Coffin, the song appeared on Nirvana's third and final studio album, In Utero. The track was first written in early 1992, but it took nearly a year before Kurt was satisfied with it. After numerous revisions, Heart-Shaped Box was finally given its live debut in January 1993 at a show in Brazil. When discussing the song, Kurt once claimed that it was inspired by a television report on children suffering from cancer. However, many argue that its lyrics actually serve as a metaphor for his fraught, intoxicating relationship with Courtney. The song's eerie imagery, lines like, "I've been locked inside your heart-shaped box for weeks," suggests a sense of entrapment, an inescapable pull toward something beautiful yet suffocating. One of the most infamous theories surrounding Heart-Shaped Box is that the title refers to a voodoo charm Courtney allegedly bought in New Orleans to make Kurt obsessed with her, a box meant to ensnare him in her love, to trap him. Whether this was a literal event or simply a metaphor, the song paints a picture of desire tangled with pain, a love that feels more like a haunting than a comfort. The song's music video, shot between late August and early September 1993, was filled with surreal, disturbing imagery, crucifixes, an old man resembling Jesus, and a sickly-looking girl reaching for fetuses in a tree. It was haunting, beautiful, and unsettling, much like Kurt himself. No one knew it at the time, but Heart-Shaped Box would be the last music video he would ever make. Despite the ongoing chaos in his personal life, Kurt Cobain continued to create at an astonishing pace. In September 1993, Nirvana made their second appearance on Saturday Night Live. Despite his deteriorating mental and physical health, he still gave a raw, passionate performance, channeling his anguish into the music. Later that year, Nirvana recorded their MTV Unplugged in New York performance, which became one of the most watched and iconic live performances in rock history. The recording, made on November 18, 1993, presented Kurt in an intimate setting, stripped of the typical loud, gritty distortion Nirvana was known for. The setlist, which included covers of David Bowie and Lead Belly songs, felt deeply melancholic and introspective. For many who watched it, the performance seemed like a quiet, heartbreaking farewell, though no one could have predicted that it would be Kurt's last television performance appearance. In the wake of the performance's air date in December of 1993, the world was left with an image of Kurt that was both vulnerable and triumphant. Someone who had opened up more than ever before, but who was also slipping further into a darkness that was consuming him. His voice on stage was more fragile than ever, and his bandmates began to notice the toll that fame and addiction were taking on him. The toxic cocktail of addiction, fame, and mental health issues weighed heavily on him, creating a chasm between him and the people who loved him, including Courtney. By the beginning of 1994, the weight of fame, addiction, and self-hatred was consuming Kurt. His depression deepened, and his heroin use became more frequent. Nirvana embarked on their European tour in February to promote In Utero, but for Cobain, the tour was less about music and more about survival. The once explosive frontman had become increasingly withdrawn, his performances unpredictable. Some nights, he played with a passion that reminded fans of his early days. Other nights, he barely seemed present, going through the motions as if he were a ghost haunting his own band. Cobain's heroin addiction had worsened, exacerbating tensions within Nirvana. Bandmates Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl were growing increasingly frustrated with his erratic behavior, his inability to function without drugs, and his refusal to accept help. The European leg of the tour was supposed to be a fresh start, but instead, it became a painful reminder that something was deeply wrong. As Nirvana's European tour took a brief pause, Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love reunited in Rome for what was meant to be a moment of respite. But instead of solace, the trip would mark one of the most harrowing episodes in Cobain's downward spiral. Even before arriving in Italy, Cobain's emotional state had been unraveling. Love later recalled a phone call she received from him while he was in Spain. Alarmed, she immediately flew to Rome to be by his side, hoping to provide some comfort. On the evening of March 3rd, the couple dined together, drinking champagne and trying at least for a few hours to escape the weight of their reality. But by dawn, the illusion of normalcy had shattered. Around 5:30 a.m., Love awoke to find Cobain collapsed on the floor beside their bed, unconscious, unresponsive, his breathing shallow. Panic surged through her as she frantically called for help. Paramedics arrived and rushed Cobain to the hospital, where doctors worked to stabilize him. His stomach was pumped, ridding his system of the estimated 50 Rohypnol pills he had ingested. For several harrowing hours, he remained in a coma, hovering between life and death.
And if you want to find out about Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, who supposedly is either in a coma or he's dead.
Well, he's probably in a coma.
How do you know?
How do I know? Well, they say he's in critical condition at this Roman American clinic.
And what do they say? Was he doing drugs?
He was drinking champagne and doing some barbiturates.
Jackie's doing that now. He's fine.
He doesn't know how to mix, obviously.
Jackie, how do you mix that stuff?
Lead a wild and sometimes dangerous life, but Kurt Cobain's partying almost killed him. The lead singer of the rock band Nirvana, seen here in a recent video, is slowly recovering from a massive drug overdose in Rome. Cobain slipped into a coma last night after taking a large dose of painkillers with champagne, but he is conscious again, and doctors are optimistic he's going to fully recover.
The 7-year-old singer was back to normal and doing fine. Doctors have said that Cobain would not suffer any permanent damage. The singer, who was in Rome taking a break from the group's European tour, lapsed into a coma late last week after overdosing on tranquilizers and alcohol.
Initially, the overdose was dismissed as an accident, a reckless mix of sedatives and alcohol. But those close to Cobain suspected otherwise. His growing paranoia about Love's alleged infidelity had consumed him, fueling his depression. Whether his suspicions were real or not, the fear had burrowed into his psyche, feeding his isolation and self-loathing. In the weeks following Rome, Cobain's relationship with Love became even more volatile. Reports of frequent heated arguments surfaced, some escalating into physical altercations. On March 18th, police were called to their home in Seattle after an explosive fight. Cobain had locked himself in a room with a gun, threatening to take his own life. Officers managed to de-escalate the situation and seized several firearms from the house, but the incident made one thing clear: Cobain was in crisis, and he was running out of time. The fractures within Nirvana had reached a breaking point. Cobain's addiction and increasing disinterest in the band were pushing him further away from the music that once defined him. In late March, he reportedly told Love, "I can't play with them anymore." He had begun exploring other musical endeavors, including a potential collaboration with Michael Stipe of REM. But it was clear, he wanted out. Rumors also circulated that Cobain had written letters to his management and record label, demanding to be released from his contract. Some claimed he was attempting to fire Novoselic and Grohl, though whether this was an impulsive act of desperation or a true desire to dissolve the band remains uncertain. The Nirvana that had once shaken the world was crumbling, and Cobain was at the center of its collapse. The situation came to a head when Novoselic drove Cobain to the airport for a flight to rehab in Los Angeles. What should have been a hopeful step toward recovery quickly spiraled into chaos. During the drive, Cobain broke down. He cried, screamed, and in a moment of sheer desperation, attempted to jump out of the moving car on the highway. Novoselic, panicked, pulled him back, begging him to stay in the car. At the airport, things escalated further. Cobain lashed out, punching Novoselic in the face. The two friends ended up wrestling on the ground in the crowded terminal, throwing wild punches. It was a brutal, heartbreaking moment, the kind of fight that only happens when love and frustration reach their boiling point. Eventually, Cobain freed himself and ran off through the airport, screaming expletives. And sadly, it was the last time Novoselic ever saw him. Cobain checked into Exodus Recovery Center in Marina del Rey, California, on March 28th, seemingly taking a step toward recovery. However, just 36 hours later, he made a sudden decision to leave. Climbing over a 6-foot-high fence, he vanished into the night, leaving behind his counselors and any hope of structured intervention. Now a missing person, his sudden disappearance set off a frantic search. Love, who was also in Los Angeles at the time, immediately hired private investigator Tom Grant to track him down. Desperate for answers, she reached out to friends and even filed a missing person report under Cobain's mother's name, Wendy O'Connor, hoping police would take it more seriously. But Cobain was elusive. His credit card had been flagged, and attempts to use it were monitored, but he had already gone completely off the grid.
But the thing about Kurt is he can't get a cab for himself.
We were both a little surprised when you said, you canceled his credit card, so he's without money. It's just, he can't figure out how to get money if he doesn't have his credit cards.
No.
He doesn't have his own bank account?
No, we have the same bank account.
Yeah.
And I canceled the Excel card. But maybe I shouldn't have done that so I could have kept track of him, obviously.
Over the next few days, he wandered unnoticed before returning to Seattle. There, he quietly slipped into the Lake Washington house he shared with Love, a place that had become both a refuge and a prison for him. Alone, he avoided all contact, refusing to answer phone calls or acknowledge the outside world. On April 2nd, it was reported he took a taxi to a Seattle gun shop, where he purchased a box of 20-gauge shotgun shells. The store owner later recalled that Cobain appeared calm and polite, explaining that he needed the shells because his home had been burglarized. He even kept the receipt, a small but haunting detail. The truth, however, was much darker. Cobain already had a Remington Model 11 shotgun, obtained just days earlier through a friend. In his final days, Kurt Cobain seemed to drift further into isolation. Some claimed he wandered through parks, while others believed he stayed in motels, lost in thought. At one point, he reportedly attempted to reach out to an old friend, but his call was met with silence. On April 5, 1994, Cobain retreated to the greenhouse above the garage of his Lake Washington home. With a cigarette burning between his fingers and a pen pressed to paper, he poured his final thoughts into a letter, a farewell tangled in sorrow, apology, and frustration. Then the world went quiet. For days, no one knew where he was. Calls went unanswered. Concern turned to dread. It wasn't until April 8th that Gary Smith, an electrician arriving to install a security system, peered through the glass and stumbled upon a chilling scene. At first, he thought the figure inside was a mannequin, but as he looked closer, the awful truth settled in. Cobain was gone. A shotgun rested across his chest. Nearby, his final words lay neatly beside him, a haunting testament to a life that burned too bright and faded too soon. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Seattle police arrived quickly, confirming his identity. As the reality of the tragedy set in, the news media scrambled to report the devastating loss of one of rock's most iconic voices.
Police officers had to break into the house to get to the body. They say the suicide happened sometime yesterday. The contents of the suicide note have not been released. The medical examiner has removed the body for an autopsy. Today, fans gathered outside Cobain's mansion, mourning the loss.
I never thought in a million years that something like this could happen. This is insane.
That afternoon, MTV News interrupted its programming. A solemn Kurt Loder appeared on screen, his voice heavy with sorrow, stating, "The body of Kurt Cobain was found in a house in Seattle on Friday morning, dead of an apparently self-inflicted shotgun blast to the head."
Police found what is said to be a suicide note at the scene, but have not yet divulged its contents. Cobain, who was 27, had reportedly been missing for several days. The Los Angeles Times reported on Wednesday that Nirvana was breaking up and that Cobain was planning to undergo drug rehabilitation. A source close to the band told MTV News earlier this week that while that story sounded bad, it was better than what was, quote, really going on. That comment remains to be clarified. Cobain's body was found in a house in Seattle where he had previously lived. It was discovered by an electrician who had showed up at around 8 a.m. to do some work at the house. He looked in a window and said he recognized the body on the floor as Cobain's. Before calling police, the electrician first called a local radio station to break the news. Although at press time, police were declining to officially identify the body as that of Cobain, pending notification of next of kin, a reporter for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer who was on the scene ID'd the body as Cobain's, and several other news outlets have gone public with that identification.
For many young fans, MTV News was where they first heard the unbelievable and devastating news. Somewhere, in a bedroom filled with Nirvana posters, a teenager sat paralyzed in disbelief. Others watched from their living rooms, stunned, as the reality of Cobain's death hit them. The voice that had given them anthems of rebellion and alienation, Smells Like Teen Spirit, Lithium, and Come As You Are, was now gone forever. Radio stations across the country immediately began playing Nirvana's music, tributes pouring in from fans and fellow musicians. The grunge movement, which Cobain had reluctantly become the face of, had lost its brightest star. But as the tributes rolled in, so did the criticism. To many in the older generation, Cobain was not the poetic voice of a generation, but just another rock star who let drugs consume him. Comparisons to John Lennon's murder in 1980 were met with backlash. While Lennon was seen as an artist assassinated for his beliefs, Cobain was painted as a rock star who took the easy way out. To critics, his suicide was an act of selfishness, leaving behind his wife, Courtney Love, and their daughter, Frances Bean, to deal with the aftermath. Even within the music community, some struggled to reconcile their grief with their anger. The backlash was visible in media reactions. Some music critics and fans who had once praised Nirvana now subtly or overtly condemned Cobain for his actions. The sadness was mixed with frustration. Why had he done this? And why did he throw everything away?
And driving through the city is almost as if you're walking through a morgue. There's a serious feeling of disappointment, a serious feeling of hurt, and a serious feeling of letdown.
Yeah, I know Seattle, of course, is like, it's the mecca for all this excellent music coming out, not only Nirvana, but there's Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. And I know that you've hung out with some of the members of other groups. How do you think they would react with something like this going on in their hometown?
Well, in much the same way, serious disappointment. And there's no excuse for taking your own life.
Right.
Absolutely none.
There's a lot of people that say they're very upset at Kurt Cobain for stealing himself away from us because we were enjoying his talents.
There is absolutely no question.
Is there a feeling, though, that maybe people understand that maybe he felt he never really did belong to the rest of us, and that's part of why he did this?
That's the $10,000 answer to the question. I don't know. It's a huge question mark in the city right now.
I can imagine.
All right, Shelley, if you hear anything, let us know, because we know that you've got your finger on the pulse in Seattle, right?
Yeah, and it's just it's probably 5 blocks down the road from our radio station is his house. Boy. So we're just inundated by police and all that down the road. It's pretty amazing.
All right, Shelley, let us know if you hear anything else, okay?
All right, will do.
Bye-bye.
Courtney Love was in Los Angeles when she received the call. Nirvana's manager, John Silva, broke the news, and in an instant, she collapsed under the weight of the unimaginable. Just days before, she had been frantically trying to reach Kurt, knowing he was slipping further away. She had felt it. Something was wrong. Her worst fears had materialized. She was a widow, and their daughter, Frances Bean, just a year old, was fatherless. On April 10th, Seattle held a public vigil at Seattle Center for mourning fans. An estimated 7,000 people gathered in the cold drizzle, many wearing Nirvana shirts, clutching candles, and crying. It was a scene of collective grief. A pre-recorded message from Courtney Love over a megaphone was played, where she read the excerpts from Cobain's suicide note, with her voice cracking with sorrow and rage. She broke down, then chastised Cobain in a mix of grief and anger. As the vigil came to a close, Love did something deeply personal. She distributed some of Cobain's clothing to the fans who remained, giving them a tangible piece of him to hold on to.
You're the best spiritual place you can, for his sake, because he doesn't want to be known for being a drug addict, and he doesn't want to be known for being a loser or anything that Rush Limbaugh called him. We all know what he gave to us, and those baby boomers are not supposed to understand, That's what people like Rush Limbaugh and Andy Rooney exist for, Kurt, to irritate. The people over 32, they're not meant to understand what Kurt was, like I said, he was put here to irritate them. These people grew up in the 60s with the generation gap, and now they're really pissed that there's another one because they refuse to grow old, And something good can come out of Kurt's death. I don't know what it is yet, but something good can. Something good can.
The 1994 MTV Video Music Awards were already off to a controversial start. Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley had opened the show with a kiss that sent the audience into a frenzy, a spectacle that immediately became one of the night's most talked about moments. But beneath the glitz and shock value, there was a weight hanging over the event, an unshakable sense of loss. When Nirvana was announced as the winner of Best Alternative Video for Heart-Shaped Box, the excitement that usually accompanied such a victory was subdued. For the first time, Kurt Cobain was not there. His absence was deafening. Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl took the stage, but there was no celebration, no raucous energy. Instead, they carried with them the gravity of the moment, the weight of grief still fresh in their eyes. Accepting the award, Dave Grohl kept his words brief, his voice steady but distant, stating, "Well, I'm not the most vocal person in the world, but it'll be silly to say that it doesn't feel like there's something missing, and I think about Kurt every day," before he thanked the fans for supporting the band as they faced hard times. There was no need for anything more. The moment spoke for itself. The crowd, full of artists, fans, and industry figures, erupted in applause, but beneath the cheers, there was a collective ache. As the year before, Kurt was just at the same award show with them. MTV, understanding the significance of Cobain's loss, had prepared a tribute, a montage of Kurt in his most vulnerable and powerful moments. Clips of him performing, laughing, lost in his music flashed across the screen. His voice echoed through the venue, haunting and beautiful, a reminder of why he mattered. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a goodbye, one that many weren't ready to say. Cobain's absence was more than just physical. It was a void that could never be filled, a reminder of how his talent, presence, and pain had shaped a generation. The music industry moved forward, but the shadow of his tragedy lingered. For Courtney Love, the months after Cobain's death were a whirlwind of grief, controversy, and survival. Their relationship, marked by passionate love, addiction, and turmoil, had been scrutinized from the beginning. Now, in the wake of his death, it became the subject of relentless speculation, conspiracy theories, and media attacks. As the world searched for answers, Love was left to navigate fame, motherhood, and the weight of being forever tied to one of rock's most tragic figures. Her life was about to take a new turn, one that would cement her status as both a survivor and one of the most polarizing figures in music.